Good morning, good morning. Hello, hello to those of you that are here so far. We'll just allow a moment for everyone else who is going to be arriving. 35 on time, very impressive. 35 here before 10 o'clock even. Excellent. So hopefully everyone else will be being let in as we speak. Right, so we'll start with a little bit of an overview of what we're covering this morning. We are doing a deep dive into the Employment Rights Act changes that are hitting us as employers in April of this year. Some of you may have been on our webinar back at the end of January, where we covered the whole of the Employment Rights Act in as much detail as we know so far. And today is specifically diving into what's happening right now in April. So a little bit less content to cover, but hopefully more time to answer questions and dive into some of those details a bit more deeply. You've got the same presenters as last time. Anyone who was here in January will recognise me. I'm Heidi. I work at Reality HR. I'm Head of Learning and Development, which basically means that I'm the one that they wheel in to talk in front of groups of people because everyone hates doing that talking piece. Nicola's with us today as well. Nicola's going to be keeping an eye on the chat for us. Any questions that come in, she's either going to try and get answers into the chat, or she's going to interrupt me and Alistair and try and chuck them into the conversation as we go through. So thanks for joining us, Nicola. And we've got Alistair, who is guest speaking again with us this morning. Alistair is from Harrington Carmichael, and we really appreciate him coming on. So thank you for being with us, Alistair. Your help is always very, very welcome. What we're going to try and cover off. Yeah, it's lovely to have. And again, Alistair's any opportunity to speak in front of a group of people, a bit like me.
I think there was an envelope being opened this morning, so I thought I should turn up. That's generally my rule. But it's lovely to see so many familiar names on the list and to be talking in front of so many familiar people this morning. So thank you for having me back, Heidi.
No, thank you for being with us. We are recording the session this morning, so we know that there's a lot of people that have registered but can't actually make the date and time. So the recording will be circulated after the session today. So if you want to forward on to colleagues or anyone else, any other interested parties, you're very welcome to do that. And if you're watching back later, I hope this is a good time for you. And thank you for listening in. So as I said, we're going to try and keep an eye on chat for questions. Please use the chat function. That would be great. We'll keep an eye and try and answer any questions as we go. I mentioned this quite a lot of times, but we've created a checklist that you might find helpful after the session. There's a QR code on the screen now. This is a guide for all the compliance activities you should have in place as an employer. It covers off previous legislation, existing legislation, and there are sections about all the things that are coming under the Employment Rights Act. So it's a really good opportunity to sort of sit and take stock of where you are. All of the things that are coming are, like I say, I mentioned in the guide, in the checklist, but we're going to go into the detail of some of those today. Right, so the Employment Rights Act. Some of you will have heard me say this before. There are a raft of things coming, loads and loads of areas, touches all sorts of areas of employment, and staggered. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for us to implement as employers. But, you know, there is a lot to be mindful of. And as I say, today we're going to be looking at this middle tab on the screen here, this what is live in April. So we're going to break each of these down and talk one by one about each of the things that are hitting us in April. So let's dive straight into what have we picked first? Right, we've picked paternity leave and unpaid parental leave. So paternity leave becomes a day one right from the beginning of April. Previously, people must have worked for their employer for 26 weeks to be entitled to take paternity leave. That is now going to be a day one right. We hear day one rights a lot. This government have talked a lot about day one rights in various guises. So literally what that means is from the first day of employment, people have the right to these new, in this particular case, the right to paternity leave. But Alistair, there's a bit of a question, or there was a bit of a question that I think we've now got clarity on about paternity pay. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And I think from the position that we're still taking is that paternity pay still has to be paid once an employee has the length of service point. So we're still in a world where, although the paternity leave applies, the paternity pay will require the service arrangements. Obviously, lots of clients and lots of entities do different things. And obviously, lots of you will be paying enhanced paternity pay, for example. You therefore need to look very carefully at what you're doing and make sure that that is mirroring both the statutory schemes as exist, but also your own internal policies as well. And there's nothing to stop you necessarily having a requirement for service where you have got an enhanced scheme, but just be careful to make sure it doesn't go underneath what the statutory scheme requires.
So the statutory requirement for taking paternity leave has a notice requirement to it at the moment, doesn't it? People are supposed to give notice before they take their paternity leave. How does that impact now? If people from the first day of their employment, can they tell you that tomorrow I'm going on paternity leave?
Well, theoretically, yes. I mean, at the moment, they've got to give you 8 weeks notice for the purpose of taking paternity leave. But the theory, and this is the difficulty I think that employers face, because let's take a hypothetical scenario that you employ somebody today and then they give you a notice that they're having a child being born tomorrow. What are you going to do? Are you going to say to them, no, really sorry, that doesn't apply? Now, I think in most cases, people will be clear with you as part of a recruitment strategy that they are intending to take leave. And in most cases in recruitment strategies, you will say to people, is there any leave you're intending to take? Is there any holiday pay you've got booked? It would be sensible to broaden those questions now to include any family-based leave that you're intending to take as well. Given the fact that these are day one rights, you've got to be ready for the potential that somebody is going to say to you on day 2 that I'm going to need to take a period of leave. But 9 times out of 10, people are going to tell you that before they've joined you, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say the same thing. We always ask that question at interview: have you got any holiday booked? It's easy just to say, have you got any holiday or other leave that's likely to impact in the coming months? So that's hopefully gives you a bit of a heads up at that interview stage, at the recruitment stage.
Yes.
And for our existing employees, we're still going to be expecting the 8 weeks notice.
Correct. The same notice requirements to apply, and effectively the same world to continue in terms of those notice requirements. And it's making sure that you stay on top of that. But I think in most cases, as usual, it's a sensible conversation between employer and employee. And most people give a lot more notice than they're required to give.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, paternity leave is only 2 weeks, isn't it? It's not someone who's going to take the next year off for like maternity leave might be a much longer period. Actually, paternity leave is only 2 weeks. It's almost like having a pre-booked holiday in most cases.
And let's remember we are only talking about paternity. We're not talking about maternity here, although we have got the unpaid parental leave issues as well.
Absolutely. So I was just going to say that the other parental leave that becomes a day one right is this ordinary parental leave. Currently, people have to have a year's service to be eligible to take that leave. So what's the status? Is there a notice requirement on that, Alistair? I'm going to put you on the spot there and ask you.
Yeah, same as before in terms of the notice requirements, and those are not changing. What I would say about parental leave, though, I think in 20 years of practice now, Heidi, I've known of only 2 people ever take parental leave. It's so rarely taken as a right that employees have. And I think the point about it is that the reality is that most new parents can't afford to take parental leave, so they don't. And the only people I ever knew who took parental leave were not taking it for reasons of actually having for care for their children. They were taking it for having a lovely holiday or having a great big sabbatical or something such as that. They weren't using it for the purpose for which it was actually intended. Now, maybe I'm sounding a bit negative about the right, but the reality is the notice provisions stay the same. It remains as unpaid. You, as an employer, can still decline those requests, but have to look at alternative periods of time for the purposes of that. But ultimately, it's no greater right. It is just starting sooner in employment.
But if you've only come across 2, and I can again only think of one where I've had someone take actually access that relief, that's not very many. So there's likely to be very little change to the reality of the situation here.
Absolutely.
You will need to update your policies though. So those of you that have got written policies, and hopefully you all have got written policies around paternity leave and around ordinary parental leave, we'll just need to make sure you go back and double check that you update the service requirement to both of those policies. That's
Absolutely.
fairly small change. There are a couple of other changes that you'll see as we go through this morning that you need to make to your handbook. I've mentioned this last time, but if those of you on the call that have ongoing retainer relationships with Reality HR, if we've provided your handbook, we'll be making those updates automatically and sending them out to you. If you don't have a handbook that we support for you, then we're still very happy to make all the changes. Just talk to us, just get in touch with Nicola or myself, or if you do have a link with a consultant, Reality HR, then just get in touch with them directly, and they will be very happy to talk to you about what that could look like in terms of updating your policies. The biggest thing I think with this one is making sure your managers are aware of the changes, because actually the change might be quite minor, but we do need to make sure that managers are responding appropriately when someone comes to them. If for an example, an employee goes to their line manager and says, I want to take my parental leave or my paternity leave tomorrow, how are managers dealing with this? So this is part of the wider management sort of training and communication style, so that they're not sort of tutting and rolling their eyes and saying, oh, you're not allowed to do that. Are they actually accepting those requests? And if they don't know all the details, and who does know all the details? You've seen me, I've had to ask Alistair some questions on some of the detail there. So no one's expecting everyone to know all the detail off the top of their head, but what we want is our managers to reply and say, let me go check with the policy, let me go check with HR, but yes, of course, we'll do everything we can to make this work for you. That's the kind of approach we need to make sure our managers are taking, because if they're saying no, or like doing that eye roll, you know, that face when someone tells you they need some time off and you're like, oh no, I can't cope with that, then you're just creating tension for no reason, potentially. So it's more about the impact on how employees ask for those questions. Nicola, I'm relying on you to just shout if there are any questions on any of this before I move on.
Yeah, we just had a comment around what's happening when paternity leave, when you're changing jobs. But as we talked about earlier and Alistair talked about, it's just about flagging the possibility of needing paternity leave as you're moving into a new job. Of course, babies arrive when they arrive, so you're never going to be quite sure of the dates. So hopefully your current employer and next employer will be flexible and reasonable in allowing you to take that leave.
I always think this is brilliant that we ask people to tell us exactly when they want their paternity leave, but yeah, babies arrive when they arrive. Okie dokie. A fairly simple one to get us started this morning then. Let's move on to statutory sick pay changes. This is going to be quite impactful for some of you. So for those businesses that only pay statutory sick pay when people are off and don't enhance at all, this is going to make quite a big impact, or potentially going to have quite a big impact for you. So the changes here are that statutory sick pay, SSP, will now be paid from the first day of any illness absence instead of the fourth day. We currently have 3 waiting days where people don't get paid at all, and then SSP kicks in on the 4th day of absence. Now, the reason I think this is going to be potentially quite impactful is that often we see people don't take time off sick when they know they're not going to be paid for 3 days. So what we're likely to see now is people actually taking more short-term sickness absence, you know, because they're a bit ill, but if they're not going to get paid, they force themselves to come to work. But now actually, if they're going to get an SSP payment, they might actually take that time off. Those that are eligible for SSP is also going to be widened because the lower earnings limit's being removed. So at the moment, people who earn less than £125 per week aren't eligible for any SSP, but that lower earnings limit's being removed. So everyone now will be entitled to a SSP payment. And you can see on the screen there, SSP is to be paid at 80% of a normal weekly earnings, or the new flat rate, whichever's the lower. So there are a couple of implications, I think, for this. You might well see a lot more short-term 1-2 day absences, and you'll be paying more people when they're off sick, as well as paying those people more if that makes any sense. So the big things to do here, the first thing is check any contract templates, policies around sickness absence. If you have reference to SSP rules and eligibility in your policies, you need to make those changes ready for April. And again, same applies as before. If you've got a Reality HR handbook, we'll do that for you. If not, we can help you through it. So that's something that needs to happen. We mentioned back in January that some of you will have heard us say, consider the cost implications. So have you budgeted for potentially higher SSP payments in the forthcoming financial year? And if you haven't, you might need to go and look at that immediately, because it's unpredictable. We don't really know how many more people are going to take it, and the SSP rates are fairly low, but we do know that that is going to have potentially quite a budget impact for some businesses, particularly smaller businesses where you've got very tight budgeting controls, and anything that goes above your forecast could have quite a major impact. But more broadly, we believe that you could take this as a good opportunity to review your attendance management process. So what rules and processes do you currently have in place for people to report sickness absence? And how do you track sickness absence and monitor it? And what do you do if people are taking lots of short-term absences? Do you have a consistent approach across the organisation? Do your line managers know how to do that? There are a number of schemes that you can implement that will help you to track that absence. You need to firstly make sure you've got some sort of spreadsheet or HR information system, some way of tracking when people are off, who's responsible for recording that sickness absence, and then do you have some sort of return to work conversation with everybody? This is a really commonly used way of reducing non-genuine absence, but also very important for tracking. It might be genuine sickness absence, but if someone is having a lot of short-term absences, it's really detrimental, it's really impactful on a business. So we'd always recommend you look at some sort of system that tracks those and maybe put some triggers in place. So if people have had, I don't know, more than three absences in the last 12 months, you maybe line managers need to have a conversation with them about what that's about. Or the triggers are different. The trigger levels of the number of absences or the number of days are different in different organisations. You'll have hopefully a view of what your current levels of absence are like, which will be really useful for you to be able to go back and compare in 6 months, 12 months time to see if this has had an impact. So those sort of trigger absences, doing return to work interviews, having triggers, and then have some sort of approach to potentially penalising people who go over and above those absences is good practice, really. We talk to lots of our clients about it. I'm sure you have the same conversations, Alistair, with people about sickness absence. Now, in the main, we start from the premise that everyone gets ill sometimes. And we're not looking to penalise people who are genuinely ill, but we are looking to balance their attendance with the needs of the job and the needs of the business. So it's always about balance.
Absolutely, Heidi. And I think you've got to approach this differently for short-term and long-term absence, because and lots of you will be aware of Bradford factors and how Bradford factors are calculated and may use those in your organisation. But the fundamental is the same. It's setting a standard in terms of what you accept for absence levels, and then managing people against those levels, and then also being prepared to adjust those levels where you're dealing with disabilities in terms of which you are managing. And I think the clarity is important to make sure that employees understand what is required of them and when they're going to be effectively warned if their absence levels go too high. The difficulty with the flip side of that, and what we get often from clients is, well, if I tell my employees I'm not going to warn them up to 3 absences, they'll take 2 and they've got extra holiday then, haven't they? And I personally don't think that's necessarily the point, because most employees don't want to be absent. They want to come to work. Most people do want to be there. And I'd probably say to you, if you've got employees who are taking sickness absence instead of holiday, you've got a broader issue. You've got a culture issue, but something which you need to manage more closely. But the reality is that you're right, Heidi. We don't want to penalise those who are unwell. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity to take absence when they need to take absence, because we don't want them bringing bringing bugs into the office.
Yeah. Wiping out an entire team.
Wiping out an
because they came
entire
to work.
environment. But equally, we've got to get a balance to then manage that for where we have people who are taking liberties, fundamentally.
Yeah.
If I'm going to make one other point on your slide, if I may, Heidi. I think we've done multiple contract updates for our clients now. I haven't found anybody who hasn't had to have their sick pay clause updated yet. Everybody we've seen so far has had an update to their sick pay clause. So I'd be very surprised if the people listening to this don't have to update this, because I haven't found anybody who's talking about the wrong eligibility criteria or got the lower earnings limits wrong now. So it's contract. This is a forced contract and policy update. And of course, this now applies for new employees from April. So if you're putting out contracts of employment to people and you're doing that incorrectly, you're not complying with Section 1 of the Employment Rights Act 96, which carries penalties if you have successful claims against you. So there is an extra kicker in there too as to why you should be doing it. And everybody should be doing it. So my answer to you is a call to action and to get on with it, basically.
Just to double check then, Alistair, so we're clear that we need to update our template for any new starters from April. Do we need to go back and update contracts of existing employees?
Not for existing people, no. So anybody who's a new starter. I think that the difficulty with this is the government have been late coming out with this. And we're all in March and we're all doing our contract updates for March. But we've got people who are starting on the 1st of April. And we've already given them contracts back in January.
Yeah,
and their contracts now out of date. Now, we're taking a bit of a chance with that in our case, but you might, if you've got high numbers of people coming in, you might well want to get it updated more generally, because of the risk in terms of that Employment Rights Act 96 change.
And in terms of those existing employees who may have something that's now legally out of date in their contract, the new laws will just apply to them and they will override what's written in the contract. Great, that's it, really helpful, thank you. Good. Okay, so sickness absence more broadly is definitely a conversation to be having. Take some HR or legal advice if you want to start monitoring more closely. And as Alistair said, be really mindful of long-term sickness absence. And the other thing to be mindful of is any pregnancy-related illnesses. Awesome. So if you're implementing any sort of Bradford factor trigger levels, trigger warnings, be really mindful that it would be automatically unfair to penalise someone for being off sick with a pregnancy-related illness. Okay, I think I've just seen Hannah's question pop up, says, do we have to update pre-existing contracts or only new contracts? Yeah, that's only the new ones. Pre-existing will be overridden by the legislation changes. Good, okay. Any other thoughts on sickness? Let's move on. I'm mindful of the time. We booked 45 minutes in this morning thinking there's less to cover, but actually look at the time, Alistair, we're having a long conversation already. So whistleblowing protections from sexual harassment. So as you're probably all really aware, we've been talking about this for a long time now. The legislation around sexual harassment, or the prevention of sexual harassment more specifically, came into effect in October 2024. We have some extra obligations now as employers around that. But from April, sexual harassment becomes a qualifying disclosure under the whistleblowing protections. What does that mean for us, Alistair? What does that mean in terms of, is there much change to whistleblowing law then here?
I mean, the great question, Heidi. I might take it a little bit differently, if I may, because what we've got existing protections for people who are the subject of sexual harassment. So if you're the subject of it and you complain about it, you have a victimization complaint. So really what this law is protecting is not the person who is the subject of it, but is the person who witnesses it. So what it is effectively where you've got a situation where to be a qualifying disclosure, it has to be a legal disclosure in the public interest, and it has to fit the various markers which exist there. And the government are inserting the sexual harassment provision in relation to one of those markers. And those are things, the other markers are things such as failures to comply with legal obligations, health and safety issues, things such as that, where they're legal elements. And this is being added into that now. And really the people who benefit from that are not the subject of it, of the sexual harassment, but the witness of it, or the person who hears about it, or the person who is the complainant about it. So if you have a Christmas party, there's a bit of sexual harassment that takes place, not to be flippant about it at all. But if the person doesn't complain, but the witness complains about it, that complaint then becomes a protected disclosure. You wouldn't be able to treat the person who's complained about witnessing it any less favourably.
Because the victim or the subject is already protected if they
Correct.
spoke up. Perfect.
I mean, the subject would be able to get these protections as well. They would be able to have them, but there's nothing additional there because they've already got the victimisation protection under the Equality Act.
So this extension is for people who are reporting, who are the witness or an observer. Yes. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So very quick update to your whistleblowing policy. Good opportunity to look back at your whistleblowing policy. Make sure you've got one. We've been speaking to a couple of companies recently where they haven't got one in writing and really should have one in writing. So might be a time for a quick review about it. Make sure it references sexual harassment. And really, again, this is about managers knowing what channels there are available for people to report things so that they can answer questions if asked. But for those who are the person on the receiving end of a report of sexual harassment or any other whistleblowing complaint, is knowing how to handle that and not to brush it off, not to sweep it under a carpet, but certainly to take some advice straight away if someone does raise a concern. As Alistair said there, all of the qualifying disclosures have legal implication. So as a senior director or an owner of a business, you've got some real obligations to make sure you deal with these properly. Okay, anything else on that one, Alistair? Or are we
No, I think we're good, Heidi.
Good, excellent. Okay, let's move on then. Fair Work Agency. So as part of the ERA, the government have announced the establishment of the Fair Work Agency, which brings together existing enforcement bodies, tidies up who enforces things around statutory payments, so statutory sick pay, holiday pay, etc. What do we think, Alistair? Is it going to make much difference?
Short term, no. Longer term, possibly, is the answer to the question. I can expand on why if you'd like me to, Heidi. I think short term, I'm always a cynic about a quango. Maybe I shouldn't be cynical about a quango, but the fact is this generally government agencies are underfunded for the level of resource that they need. Our current employment tribunal service is so underfunded, it's ridiculous, and claims are taking so long to go through the process. It's a problem for claimants and it's a problem for employers who are responding to claims. This is going to have no more money applied to it that's going to make it of any great value to either party in the short term, I would say. Longer term, if it's funded, then yes, it might have a greater implication and I become less of a cynic about it. But the reality of it is that in the short term, they're going to be looking at large corporate entities to pursue for obvious breaches to gain publicity rather than pursuing small employers, I would say. And we see that in other areas such as the ICO, where they look for large cases that they can draw a lot of press coverage from to gain traction rather than pursuing small businesses. And what I would say is to be aware of it and to be careful around things such as the sick pay, the holiday pay, the wages claims, because actually it's another route that you could get penalised. And the reality is that the Fair Work Agency are most likely to write to you and ask you for your observations or for your comments before they would take enforcement action against you. I think the other point, Heidi, which is that if employees want to pursue claims, they have their avenue already to do that through ACAS and through the tribunal service. So I'm not sure that workers or employees are going to use this to a great deal more so, but I may be proved wrong. We will see.
So in terms of actions that we need to take about the Fair Work Agency, the creation of the Fair Work Agency, really, it's keep paying people correctly. That's fundamentally,
right.
Yeah. Make sure you're paying to national minimum wage. Make sure you're mindful, or your payroll provision is mindful of increase to national minimum wage in April. National living wage goes up in April. Make sure that you've not got deductions of wages that would take people below that minimum wage. Make sure you're calculating holiday correctly, which has been a very big challenge for people who work flexible or term time or unusual hours. So make sure that you're getting some good advice from HR teams, from the legal teams, from your payroll teams about paying people correctly. So fundamentally, keep paying people right, and you won't fall foul of the Fair Work Agency.
Absolutely.
Good.
And it is limited to pay, Heidi. So it's things which are within our own control. And pay is the basic element of employment, isn't it? You know, we all go to work expecting to be paid. So all that was really happening here is paying people right. I think the difficulty is the holiday pay complexities that exist around commission and bonus payments, and whether those are taken into account in holiday pay calculations or not. I could talk for the next 45 minutes on how you deal with that. So I'm not going to go too far, other than to say, if you have commission payments or bonus payments, please look very carefully at them to make sure they are treated in the right way when it comes to the holiday pay calculation.
Yeah, it's been a complex area, hasn't it? Holiday pay calculations. So pay people right, but keep good records. Make sure whoever's running your payroll, whoever your payroll liaison is with, make sure you've got good records around pay, around hours worked, around how holiday entitlements are calculated. So it's about getting those fundamentals of employment right. And if you've got any doubts or any questions at all, please get in touch with any of us, Nicola, Alistair, myself. Would be very happy to check over what you're doing and advise on any changes might be needed. So this one is really no specific action needed, just check you're doing everything right and keep doing it right going forwards. Okay, it's just an extra reminder for us, isn't it? So it's a good opportunity to sort of spring clean and go back and check where we're up to. Okay, a few other changes coming in April. We put 4 on a slide here because actually they're all fairly small, or we're going to cover them off in detail elsewhere. So Collective Redundancy Protective Award. Alistair, would you just give us a very brief overview of what that means? I mean, what is it?
This is not changing the law, this is changing the penalty that applies to the law, and that's the important thing. So as long as you're complying with the law, then you shouldn't fall foul of the penalty. The obligation to collectively consult arises where you're dismissing or proposing to dismiss 20 or more people at a single establishment within 90-day period. I'll come back to those words at a single establishment in a moment, because that's not changing, but it could change. But the point is if you're doing 20 or more redundancies in one location within a 90-day period, you have to collectively consult. That means consulting with elected employee representatives and providing statutory information to them. If you don't do that, your penalty's gone from 90 days to 180 days. Now, let's just do a little bit of maths. Let's say we're talking 20 employees and we don't do our collective consultation, and all 20 of them pursue you, you're talking roughly 10 years worth of pay. So it's worthwhile getting this right, is what I'd say to you. If you think you're going to be doing redundancies, simple answer is take advice. Take advice, take advice. Sit down with somebody and work through the numbers. Don't do this on a flyer, because the penalty is just too big. Now, I mentioned the single establishment point. I know people will be asking about this because it's something which is coming around the corner. In 2027, the government is consulting currently about removing the word single establishment from that definition, and is looking at a variety of different options. Consultation literally only opened yesterday, so it's a wait and see what happens.
So just to be really clear then, a single establishment at the moment refers to one site. So you might be a company that has 10 offices or 100 shops, and if you're closing one of those sites, one shop or one office or one factory, that's a single location at the moment. And the consultation potentially will change that to be 20 redundancies in your entire company or in a region. We don't really know yet, but that's what's
we
coming.
Don't. And the government are consulting about that 20 threshold as well, in the context of the size of the organisation, as to whether that should be scaled or not. So there's still quite a lot to watch that space in relation to that consultation on the removals of the words a single establishment. That is going to potentially be bigger than this penalty change, because if you take advice, you shouldn't fall foul of the penalty.
And when you're taking that advice, you need to be really clear, really open with your advisor about whether you've done previous redundancies, because this is about tracking your numbers. Don't forget that we changed finance. We changed finance a little while ago. It wasn't my department, so I don't mention it, but it was the same site. So don't just think about your own team, if you're talking about redundancies, you've got to think a little bit more broadly and have that conversation with your advisor right from the start so we can track those numbers.
Absolutely.
That's the key point. Count the numbers. Okay, so moving on then to menopause action plans. So from April, we are being advised to have a menopause action plan, and that will become mandatory for large employers from April 2027. So the legislation at the moment and the advice at the moment in the ERA is only aimed at companies with more than 250 employees, but really good practice to be considering this anyway, no matter the size of your organisation. You might only have 5 employees, but probably some of those are likely to be female. And of course, menopause affects everyone who, well, it affects half the population. So we do really need to be thinking about what are we doing as an organisation to support people going through menopause and educate everybody in the organisation about the impacts of menopause, about what can happen, what the changes mean, and how that might impact work. Now, this is particularly important for your line managers who may be managing someone who's impacted by menopause symptoms. And there have been a number of cases where line managers have brushed off or ignored complaints or concerns raised by people affected by menopause. So this is a time again to take a bit of stock. We're spring cleaning our policies across the board here. So although there isn't a legal obligation for you to be doing this right now, and won't be until April 2027, it's really good idea to be thinking about actually what are we doing to support those who are potentially going to be affected by menopause. So we do have another webinar coming up. Let me see if I've got the date in front of me. We will share that date on the 14th of April. We have a webinar specifically looking at what you might want to include in your menopause action plans. We will cover exactly what you could consider, how you might get, I don't know, working groups, a policy written, menopause cafe, mandatory awareness training, especially for line managers, all sorts of ideas that we're going to use that session on the 14th of April to brainstorm why you might want to do this, some of the impacts that menopause has on people or can have on people and their performance. So we'll talk about that one in a bit more detail in April. And then the other thing that's coming here around action plans, another planning opportunity for you, is gender pay gap action plans. The same timescales apply, only over 250 people, recommended from April this year, mandatory from April next year. Those of you that already have more than 250 employees are already obliged to be doing gender pay gap reporting. Am I right saying that, Alistair? That's the current position, correct, isn't it? Gender pay gap reporting, so looking at difference in salaries between male and female employees, but you will now have a requirement or an obligation to publish a action plan about how you're going to reduce any gender pay gap that you've identified in your organisation.
On a work call, could you call back in 10 minutes?
Probably a good time to start that that planning conversation now. Maybe not necessarily right from the 1st of April, but certainly before April of next year. Again, if you don't have 250 employees, you may still find this a really helpful opportunity. You know, this might still be something that you want to look at, because this is about culture. This is about in your organisation. This is about how people feel working for you. This is about fairness or perception of fairness from your employees, existing employees, but also prospective employees. Anyone who's proactively looking at this kind of stuff and saying this is what we're doing to level the playing field or even out our gender pay gap, that's a really good draw for anyone, any talented candidate in the marketplace. If they can see an organisation's having that kind of proactive planning, then that's like, oh, this is a company I might want to work for. It's going to be a really good attraction opportunity for you, even though there's not that legal obligation if you're less than 250 employees. Okie dokie. Last but not least, trade union changes. Alistair, I'll just let you talk for a minute there because I've just waffled on for ages about action plans. Sorry.
Oh, thanks, Heidi. That's really kind. Dump me with trade union changes right at the very end. That's really kind. I appreciate it. So I suspect that not many of you have actual recognised trade unions in your organisation. So I don't want to take too long over this, but the principles are such that from April there'll be reduced requirements in relation to balloting. So not reduced requirements, different requirements in relation to balloting. There'll be the allowance effectively for electronic balloting. The recognition numbers that an employer has to get remain the same. The idea behind it was to try and simplify it, but actually really it's only the electronic balloting that is coming to permit it.
It's 2026 after all.
It is 2026, right? I mean, we should have been able to do this already. I mean, I think, but anyway, there we go. There are bigger trade union changes coming. There was consultation that was announced this week in relation to changing the recognition or derecognition approaches that exist and how that now fits in a modern workplace. The reality is this is open to consultation. It is going to take quite a lot of time to come through. It's a 2027 problem for those of you who have bigger trade union involvement. But again, if you have trade unions, it's worthwhile looking at this, keeping on top of it and taking some advice. Very happy to talk it through in more detail with any of you. But the reality is that most of that advice will be, look, sit, wait, see what comes in 2027 if you need to do anything different. I know for lots of you on this call, you will be fearful about the potential for trade unions coming into your workplaces where they haven't been before. I think we have to remember the reality here is that trade unions are not necessarily ready for this themselves. So even if they are given the greater rights, they've still got to have the ability to action those rights. So I wouldn't be keeping myself awake at night thinking, oh my goodness me, we're a small organisation. What happens if we get a trade union recognised in here? How does that disrupt my organisation? How does it change my organisation? The reality is they're probably not going to have the resources to target your organisation. And I also have to say there are lots of really great trade unions out there too, who do really great work for employers as well. And if you're really that concerned about it, come and have a chat, because we'll get ahead of the game. We'll go and find your trade union. We'll get them recognised, and that will be actually easier for you. So there's ways and means for thinking about it laterally as well if it's genuinely of concern.
Excellent. I don't think we've had any questions come in around trade unions or menopause or any of the things on this slide. So that is the end of the April changes. Hopefully we've given you a little bit more detail than we were able to go into last time. Hopefully you're all feeling very well prepared. If you want to get in touch, our contact details are on the screen, or Alistair at Harrington Carmichael. You'll find him easily on LinkedIn. I haven't got your email address on.
If you search Google, you type my name in, you get me or a guy from the Royal Shakespeare Company. I can assure you I'm not the guy from the Royal Shakespeare Company. So I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. Please go find me. Very happy to be your friend on there, and whatever is needed.
Brilliant. And there's a couple of other QR codes on the screen for those of you that might want to take some next steps from here today. The left-hand one is a link to all the ERA resources. So the checklist I referenced earlier is available on that page, but also some blogs around and articles around what's coming under the ERA changes. And then the one on the right is to sign up to our Menopause Action Plan webinar that I said is coming up on the 14th of April. So I'm going to leave those on the screen. And we are going to say it is 10:44. So I've saved you all 1 minute. I'm sure people have got meetings back to back in their diaries, so we're going to wish you all a very good day, and please do get in touch, as Alistair says, via LinkedIn to himself, or Nicola or I would be very happy to put you in touch with a Reality HR consultant or advisor as needed. I hope it's been useful. Thank you all so much for joining us, and if you're watching back the recording, thanks Alistair, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks everyone.
Excellent. I've just seen a question from Philip. Is a quango one of my 5 a day? Alistair, there you go. A quango is one of your 5 a day now.
Sorry.
That's it. We decree it to be. Thanks, everybody. Cheers all. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
I think I need to stop being so offensive about quangos. I have to try and, limit my